And now I'm happy to pass the reins over to Devin. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Who here has been to the other 4 color lectures? Raise your hand if you have. Oh, cool. We got some repeats. That's great. Yeah, welcome and thank to the makeup lecture. This is both lecture 4 and 6 due to the nonlinearity of time. And so what we're going to talk about today is optical filtration. And this is going to be a more kind of focused talk than the previous ones. There's not going to be as much in the way of, overall arching history of cinema, but more a few really interesting artists using a specific tool in a very interesting way. For those of you who here saw blue actually when they showed, who here showed to blue? Oh, wow, that's great. So this talk is going to be equally relevant to both blue and to the Double Life of Veronique, which are the 2 films that are kind of we're showing in this series. So it's nice that we got to see 2 Kieslowski films. So let's talk about what filtration is. Filtration refers, in this case, to a specific set of tools. These are optical filters placed in front of the lens. This is a camera with a lens on the front with a matte box in front of that. And inside that matte box, you might see a little reflection. That's a standard 4-inch by 5.6-inch glass filter. And these are the specific tools that Kieslowski and Icek, the cinematographer who shot the 2 films we've shown, tend to use. But these effects filters have some interesting kind of side effects. In this case, we're talking about artists using these not to darken the light or to soften the light or to provide just a piece of glass. It is a way of filtering out certain wavelengths of color. And this has certain effects. So I want to ask yourself, when you look at this image here, this is an image of strawberries that has been filtered. Is there any red in this image? And your brain says yes, right? Clearly those are strawberries, therefore they are red. They are less teal than the things around them. But there is in fact no red in this image. This is our brain. It is a combination of 2 effects: memory colors, the fact that our brain can remember what things look like and imprint those on images that don't have that color, and second, our mind's wonderful ability to essentially offset for any color gain or offset application. In this case, a bunch of teal has been added, and our brain is really good at filtering that out, especially if I were to show it full screen with all the lights turned off. Your brain might actually eventually see this as a neutral image. And so filters create interesting psychological effects and biological effects in us when we use them. Some early history, use of filters. We can see this very controversially in the film South Pacific, shot by DP Leon Shamroy.
You hear voice?
This is a film that is routinely mocked for its extreme use of filters. And in this case, the filters were used for a specific reason. They were used to signify that we're in a musical number. And this scene I love because it swaps between multiple colors of filters throughout its length. We start with teal, and even within the same shot, we swap to red. And as the singer here evokes emotions for her audience, emotions are externalized by a series of very strident color filters. This was widely panned when it came out, this use of filters. And so this tells us something, right? That manipulating the palette of a film in this way, in this extreme strident way that calls all the attention in the world to itself, audiences might reject it, right? They might go, okay, I'm being made too aware of the artifice. Probably the most common use of filters in the classical Hollywood universe, color filters, I mean, were to evoke a sense of night in scenes shot, in fact, during the day. This is my favorite fight scene in film history, in film The Big Country, directed by William Wyler. And in this case, this is a scene shot in the middle of the day in broad daylight. And through a use of color and graduated filters, they have manipulated they have filtered out all the green and red in the image, or most of it, and left more blue, which creates this semiotic sense of night. This is not what night actually looks like to us as humans, but it is giving us enough signifiers that it is night. I mean, I think even the sound design, the crickets help with this, that this set of color filters evokes night without actually replicating it. You can see the effect fall apart if we simply take a day for night scene. This is from John Ford's The Searchers, and brighten and white and neutrally and neutral white balance it. And this is a specific filter wherein the cinematographer was expected to expose normally. So you'd expose for this, use your light meter, dial in your camera's aperture to achieve this this level of light, and then you would slot in a standard filter, which took it down by a stop or two and added a whole lot of blue, or actually I shouldn't say added, takes away a whole lot of red and green to essentially offset enough to faithfully replicate night, or the sense of night. We can see, this has parallels, looking back to our first lecture, with silent film tinting. This is filtration used to take advantage of our kind of, aesthetic and cultural associations with, in this case, night. We can see, in this case, two depictions of night in the tinting era of monochromatic film. And so we can see that things, this is actually inadvertently a great example of orthochromatic film stock and its way of rendering skies, meaning making the depiction of quote-unquote night pretty difficult. And so, one type of filter that we have to grapple with when we talk about the works of Kieslowski is that of graduated filters. All the filters we've looked at so far have affected the entire image. And Sławomir Icek, the cinematographer for these two films, was one of the probably history's most extreme purveyors of the graduated filter. That is a filter that across one axis of the image, or multiple axes, increases or decreases its effect. In this case, we have a scene from Ridley Scott's The Duelists, where we have clearly the entire image has been filtered yellow, but at the very top of the image, going towards the middle, we have a graduated neutral density filter, a filter that essentially darkens the image. And this has the effect of essentially creating a graduation from an underexposed top to a neutrally exposed middle. This is often used in Hollywood to darken the skies, to ensure that the skies aren't overexposed. For example, we can see some examples of that here, where to draw our eyes' attention to the middle of the image, they have strategically darkened the sky. And again, this is all glass in front of the lens. This is not done in post-production at all, nor could they at the time. And however, these were often used, especially by non-Hollywood filmmakers, for more expressive ends. And we can see that in something like one of my favorite movies, which is Sweetheart's The Green Snake. A set of pink graduated filters throughout the film serves to kind of playfully romanticize the image. Throughout this film, there is an incredibly strong amount of these multicolored graduated filters that give the film this kind of split-toned feel. Throughout, we are presented with images that kind of fade off into pink, blue, green, orange, and this is certainly a more overt use of the filters than anything Hollywood would try to attempt. That CGI stork was added in a rather ill-advised remaster. Don't judge the film for that. Which brings us to the main subject of today's talk, which is Polish cinematography and how one cinematographer in particular kind of revolutionized international use of these filters. I'm particularly talking about the director Kieslowski and the cinematographer Sławomir Icek, and who are the team behind the two films we're talking about today. Here we have Kieslowski hanging off the side of a car, and I show this image to kind of express just how unconventional the Polish system of visual design was compared to especially Hollywood. I'm going to quote Icek here. Long quote. "Our country was for so many years in seclusion. We somehow developed a different system. It was first of all grounded in the film schools, and he's talking about mostly Łódź Film School here, which had only two departments, the directorial department and the cinematography department. In Poland, the cinematographer is number 2 and starts work on the project very early. Kieslowski, for example, gives the cinematographer the first treatment of the script, the first 3 pages. In nearly 80% of cases, the cinematographer is the co-author of the shooting script. Directors expect cinematographers to bring their own world, their own vision. So it was very unusual when I, all of a sudden, realized that here in the West, it was the director telling the cinematographer, put the camera here. For me, that is 2 totally different professions. That means, so, this means that in the case of Polish filmmakers, but I would say Kieslowski in particular, his visuals were extraordinarily subject to the personal styles of his cinematographers. And so what we're going to see when I compare a few of these works is incredible divergence in visual strategies. And this means that Sławomir Iczek's extreme style makes itself known to a degree that it would never make itself known in any of his Hollywood films. Here are 3 shots from the Three Colors trilogy. The top left, that is Three Colors Blue, shot by Iczek. On the right, we have, or on the bottom, sorry, we have Three Colors White, shot by Edward Kwiatkowski. And on the top right, we have Three Colors Red, shot by Piotr Sobocinski. And all 3 of these films, to me, are fascinating because they feel like they take place in different realities. We're going to dig into it a bit, but we have this extreme kind of externalized theatrical emotionality of Iczek. You have the almost documentary naturalistic style of Kwiatkowski in White, and we have this almost what we might call today a commercial style, a soft-lit glamour photography that Sobocinski tends to apply to Red. There we go. Of course, this by no means precludes through lines. Here we have all 3 films use visual motifs, right? And these are often in the script. Kieslowski's scripts will often specify this shot is, in this case, shot through with reflections, right? So even depending on the cinematographer, this isn't like a non-auteurist thing, right? It's a collaboration. Kieslowski's visual style rhymes, but it's almost rhymes as performed by different musicians, if we want to extend the musical metaphor a little too far. So, we have, in this case, Three Colors Red, and I like to compare Red to Double A for Veronique, which is today's film, in particular because they both feature the same subject in Irene Jacob. And she could not look more different in these films. We have here a soft lighting, and when I say soft lighting, I don't mean the brightness of the lighting, I mean the quality of the lighting. Notice how in all 3 of these shots, there are no hard shadows on Jacob's face. There's no kind of cutout nose shadow that we might associate with 3-point butterfly lighting. This is soft lighting that sculpts a face in 3 dimensions. Again, I would say it feels modern and trendy because this is how most cinematographers these days tend to key their subjects. And if we compare that to something like Double Life for Veronique, we have hard sources, light sources that call much more attention to themselves, and far more extreme filtration. We have, notice how at all times in Red, our skin tones, with mild variations, tend to be that kind of natural kind of orange color that we tend to expect when a subject is neutrally lit. And in Veronique, we have bright orange and green, right? This is Iczek kind of in his element. I might even call it glamour versus anti-glamour lighting. So to discuss these films, though, we have to go back one film. Iczek and Kieslowski worked together for decades before they worked on Veronique and the Three Colors Blue. But they're kind of, I'd say their famous style that they pioneered and made famous really only came about due to an extreme disagreement over a short film about killing, also known as Decalogue 5. And I'll play a bit of that while I speak over it. So this is an interview with Itchek, as done in around 1995. The interviewer asked him about the film stock he's using and whether that achieved this look on the short film about killing. Here's what Itchek says. Well, it's a very good negative, Agfa, and it was me who destroyed it. I didn't want to do a short film about killing. Kieslowski approached me and gave me a choice of all 10 films. I wanted to do number 9, a very simple story about love. Then Kieslowski said to me, I know your trick. The moment I'm ready to do number 9, you'll be abroad and unable to do it. And now that I'm ready to do a short film about killing, you won't do it. I said to him, listen, why must I do such a story? After an hour, one person gets killed, and then after a half an hour, another person gets killed. It's terrible. Why do I have to do it? But Kieslowski's a very stubborn person, so I told him, okay, I'll do it on the condition that I can do it green and using all my filters. Kieslowski then replied, I don't want to have it green. It's a TV series. I can't have it all of a sudden have one green. This is all translated from Polish, so it's, sorry for the slight syntactical errors. So I said, it's up to you. Either I do it green or I don't do it. The next day, Kieslowski came to me and said, I'm doing 10 films. Okay, if one has to be green, let it be shit green. It's your decision. Do it green. You know, it's the first time in my life that this happened. A director telling me to do crazy things. Kieslowski is open to any kind of risk. He really gives the room to the cinematographer because he strongly believes that the look is more important than anything else. And here's a post from cinematography.com from someone who attended one of Itchek's master classes and asked him some questions. And this is the only place I could find this info, which is really interesting. Itchek talked about his extensive collection, over 1,000, of found and bought custom filters. He usually brings 500 to 600 with him in sets of 30 labeled alphabetically. He has a custom matte box with 6 to 10 slots, so he can layer multiple filters. And so you have here someone who has designed a highly unusual toolkit for doing things like this. A bit later on, I'll have time to do it, I'll kind of simulate how he might think about it by applying a recreation of these filters in post-production to a neutral image. A 2016 interview where Itchek goes into the reasoning behind the use of these filters. You know, Poland used to be behind the Iron Curtain, and that was a completely different kind of reality. Of course, the reality we experienced didn't look like what you see in the film, but we were still deeply secluded. We somehow lived behind a glass window and watched the so-called reality of people who spent their lives in a completely different system and environment. I believe that a certain amount of exaggeration is necessary to depict this. The story is a graphic representation of something that doesn't exist, so I decided to use a very strong visual language to reflect that. I think it's worth noting that both times I have had the pleasure of seeing Decalogue 5 in cinemas, I have seen people run out to tell the projectionist it's broken. Kieslowski on this shot. This is if you can't tell, this is a set of false teeth on the ground. Green is supposed to be the color of hope, the color of spring. But if you put a green filter on the camera, the world becomes crueler, duller, and emptier. Everything was shot with filters. It was Itchek's idea. He made 600 filters. There were usually 3 or more filters in the camera. They once fell out. What an effect! There was a perfectly normal set of false teeth lying on the normal mud once the filters were gone. But once they were back in, you couldn't see anything. You couldn't see either the teeth or the mud. Then that's when I realized we were doing something horrible. And throughout, this definition of filters expands to the mise-en-scène, right? What's in front of the camera? There's glass throughout Kieslowski, and especially in Veronique and short film about killing. He says, there are many reflections in my films, through windows, through doors, because this horrible story reflects the world, and for reflections to be true, it has to be disgusting. And so he makes incredible use of these, and they'll often put gels on these surfaces to further enhance that horribleness. I think it's worth noting that filters, again, don't have to be limited to the tools you put in your matte box. You can use anything in the world to further enhance this effect. You know, it can even be someone looking through their arm. Here we have a point of view shot of our killer looking through his arm, creating his own little filter. All right, here's where I recreate some of that in Resolve. 1 second. So this is just color correction software where I can do the thing. 1 second. Here. This is what I had at hand. This is a film we made about 10 years ago. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk through I've set up my color timeline so that when I apply color corrections, it essentially replicates the physical stuff happening when Itchik puts filters in front of his lens. So we have, for example, if I want to add a bunch of yellow to the image, maybe in Double Light for Veronique, he will start with a baseline of a ton of yellow. Then he might, to make the world seem a little bit more magical or otherwise horrific, depending on which film you're watching, he might put a green graduated filter on camera left, for example, to emphasize and to apply this kind of split image, right? Separate the background from the foreground. And then he might, if this is a short film about killing, create a little circle filter. He will use a vignette filter, which is a circular graduated filter, to strategically darken. Let me just reverse it, otherwise I'm going to do the wrong thing. 1 second. Doing color live is its own thing. You might darken all the edges to create a sense of, again, this foreboding, horrific world around our character. And then you might, use various printing and bleaching processes to, maybe darken the image. And then, then I can just add some contrast to simulate a more contrasty film stock, and there we go, we have a short film of killing. But as you can see, with the exception of my contrast, which is either done with film stock selection or with special post-production photochemical tools, each one of these, the yellow, green, circular vignette, these are all, again, me just recreating the filters he has in front of his camera. Part of the fun about digital filmmaking is that you can kind of reverse engineer this project in a virtual space and recreate this effect, assuming you collect the data. All right, let's go back to Chrome. So Double Light for Veronique, which is what we're watching today, uses, it's interesting because one kind of rhyme throughout these talks is that tools are not effects. The same tool can be used for two totally different means and ends. Kieslowski on tinting in Veronique. We used one fairly basic filter, a golden yellow one. Thanks to it, the world of Veronique is complete, it's whole. You can recognize it. Filters give uniformity, and that's very important. The fact that Sławek, that's his Polish abbreviated name for Sławomir, used filters for exteriors in Veronique isn't all that thematically important, but it is extremely important in a short film about killing because of the filters, because of that different, very cold color, the world becomes far crueler than it is. In Warsaw, yet more disgusting. He says more. The same principle applies to Veronique, but with the opposite effect. Here the world appears more beautiful than it is. The warmth comes from the actress, the staging, and also the dominant color, the shade of gold. It strikes me that this shade of gold isn't that different than the shit green in a short film about killing, but the context, the tone of the film is completely different, right? All of our tools are context dependent in that way. Kieslowski, and so here's some examples of that, right? This golden, wonderful fairy tale world. But I think it's also notable that unlike a short film about killing, and this also applies to Three Colors Blue, Itchik uses mostly lighting to create these kind of two-tone worlds, where if you'll notice, for example, the conductor in the top image, he is golden, fairy tale, but he's lit with a green light. On the set, this light would probably have looked sort of a bluish teal, right? And then the filter would correct it to this green, but you have these two tones working in 3 dimensions. So he's combining what we talked about in the third class, second class, this lighting technique of different tones with filters to create a completely new effect. We can see similar effects at the bottom, where again, very clever use of cooler green lights creates these separations in depth and kind of enhances this gem color. They also use a different set of filters. Again, whereas in the short film about killing, you had glass in the world, they chose the most disgusting things. In Double Veronique, you have Itchik and Kieslowski choosing things like marbles and magnifying glasses. Here's the same cinematography.com post. Itchik used a magnifying glass in front of the lens while holding the camera. It's not an original technique, but to do it all at the same time, combining these techniques, was deeply impressive. I was interested in hearing how much Kieslowski was against a lot of Itchik's ideas for double life. Itchik had to fight for these filters and these lenses, and apparently there were deep disagreements on the film set. One of Kieslowski's, the most common things you hear about him, is that he and his collaborators had a very vigorous, almost confrontational sometimes, working method, which is an interesting kind of thing to cross-reference with his, very low-key films in certain ways. Three Colors Blue has a completely different set of things on its aesthetic mind. Kieslowski again. When I chose the cinematographers for the trilogy, I bore in mind the different needs of the films, their dramaturgy and their structure. Of course, one could imagine Sławek lighting red or Sobocinski lighting blue, but Sławek clearly wanted to work on blue. Blue required his way of looking at the world, his thinking above all. We wanted to convey Julie's, and that's Benoshi, her state of mind. Itchik. We used music and light as a guide for the inner life of Julie. It is a cinematic representation of the inner monologue. The strong blue scenes are the scenes of her loneliness in the swimming pool, reflections on her face. We kept the film with a warm atmosphere and gave it a very aggressive blue at certain moments. I think this is also kind of interesting in this film because I'll get to the restoration history in a second because it's interesting, but blue is not the dominant color in blue, which throws people for a loop. Orange is the dominant color in blue. In a shot that is just, again, a random shot of a landscape, the dominant color will, because of the filters they use, be blue. And what their strategy was here was to use that so that anything in the film that is blue, the beads, the water, would stand out and call more attention to itself. If you look at a blue image, it ceases being blue. If you look at a yellow image and are suddenly presented with a strong stab of blue, that is blue. We can see this here, where you have this very strident grad filter at the top, turning the image blue. That, again, it only lands because the bottom half of the image is so powerfully yellow. We see them kind of continuing to deepen their explorations. Here we have a scene where Julie sits in a chair, and over top of visitor's store, we see this blue light enter the frame. I want to. This actually is a totally different method, but it fits in with their normal scheme. How they did this though was really risky and really don't do this at home. Itchik says this effect was achieved totally by accident. I had something in my mind, my plan didn't work, so we tried something new. It was a Saturday, and the amount of light was too weak to achieve a decent effect. So I placed the negative on the plate and had blue gels on the back of the camera. Then I opened the plate door, and it happened by miracle. So essentially, they're running, there's a couple different ways that he explained this, but essentially they ran the film through the camera, opened the back of the camera, exposing the back of the film to light while they were filming, and put a blue gel over it. And so the film is essentially being pre-flashed live while they're shooting with different degrees of blue gel, which is, if you've ever shot film, you think that this will absolutely destroy the image, which it does, right? This is a destroyed image, but it's an image that has been destroyed for very specific aesthetic reasons. Very interesting. Yeah, don't try that at home. We see a further expansion of their toolkit here, where in this case they have a warm filter that they shine blue lights on to create a similar effect. So this is lights shining into the front of the camera to reflect off of glass filters. And so with every film, they're kind of piling on to their aesthetic scheme with new tools, techniques, but it's all unified in this kind of idea of reflections and glass and light combining. You know, in one of the many documentaries where he talked about this, Kieslowski described these as little dancing ghosts. You know, again, reflections, televisions, even, you know, one might even consider the many televisions in the Three Colors films as yet another filter. It's an electronic filter, but it's a filter. Let's see, we have that. One thing I want to talk about, because I think this actually illustrates some of the what we're talking about very nicely, is the restoration history of both Veronique and the Three Colors films. These films, in their digital forms, were essentially not represented in any way that resembled their theatrical release for around almost 30 years. The DVDs and Blu-rays that were released of these films were essentially neutralized. You can see that in the bottom left, in the top left corner. The top left corner is around the mid-2000s transfer of the film that was released on the Criterion Blu-rays. And you notice that the light coming out of the window is what I might call digital white. It is neutral in that it carries no digital color value. Compare that to the bottom left, where the light coming through the window is digital yellow, right? There is a yellow color value. And this was very controversial because, you know, you had a lot of people saying, blue should be blue, right? The overriding tone should be blue, which is probably a very reductive and inaccurate way to view the film. And it gets at the difficulty, and you can see that there at the top is the old digital version, and they accidentally left a boom mic in the top right corner. And the bottom is the current version that you would have seen 3 weeks ago, and it was also done in the same batch of restorations that Veronique was restored in about 4 or 5 years ago by MK2. And this, to me, actually speaks to one of the risks of taking huge artistic risks like this. And that's that pipelines of distribution, restoration, exhibition aren't really designed for artists as extreme as Itchek and Kieslowski. They aren't really designed to accommodate for that. Standards and practices in the industry tend to default towards ironing those things out, right? Oh, this image is really yellow. It must be vinegar syndrome. It must be deterioration of the film stock. It must be a mistake. Let's remove that. And as you can see, the top left corner looks uncannily washed out and unhealthy as a result. But this is just probably a dailies operator, you know, a person who's in charge of transferring the film, not being given any direction and being lost at sea. And so this speaks to me to just how radical these films are. These films are among the most extreme chromatic works in cinema history, and I find it, it's a great joy to be able to show these here and talk about them, and a great way to end this series, because this is probably as extreme as it gets, and has made a huge impact on cinema since. Part of why I was happy we showed Amélie is because it is very obvious that Bruno Delbonnel and Jeanette were taking cues from Kieslowski and Itchek in their design of that film's palette. I'm not sure that Amélie would look the way it does if not for films like The Double Life of Veronique. And lastly, I want to end with the last of Kieslowski's films to be completed before his death, which is Three Colors Red. And we can see in contrast here to what we've just seen, Red's colors are all surface color. They are mise en scène. They are things in the scene that create color. We have, for example, the red paint in the background. We have the red surface of the tail light being lit by a neutral light, creating a sense of red. And this is from Kieslowski on Kieslowski. The vital components are red, but the filters aren't. Red clothes or a dog's leash. The red background is something. The color is not decorative. The color plays a dramaturgic role. It means something, but it's not the filters. Except for the last shot of the film, which is through a TV, which I'd say is the most filtery filter of all. And so, yeah, that's my talk on these films. Before we go to the Q&A, I'd like to plug one thing, and that's that in a week, we're doing a retrospective at the Cinematheque of my favorite director ever, which is Ernst Lubitsch. It's a retrospective called Only Lubitsch Could Have Made It, starting this weekend. We're going to show 6 of his films, and I'll be introducing a couple of them. So if you want to hear me yammer on about films again, go to that. If you want to see the one of the great directors ever, do a bunch of the greatest romantic comedies you've ever seen, come to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, I think we can turn up the house lights a little and start the Q&A if we have any questions. Does anyone have any questions to start off with? If not, we can start the movie early. Yeah.
Did you say that Criterion had a Blu-ray of Blue that was wrongly corrected? Because if so, I'm surprised that Criterion would have done that.
Once you really get into home video stuff, the amount of Criterion releases that are completely inaccurate is shockingly high, and they're one of the good ones. If I had to say like the best studios in the world for accuracy, probably, or boutique home video labels, which is different. Arrow and Masters of Cinema / Eureka probably, but a little better. Arrow especially, they're incredible. But yes, Criterion does make frequent mistakes, and a lot of it is because all these home video labels are often at the mercy of the masters they're given. For example, they did not color correct the 3 colors files that were sent to them. MK2 did, right? And that is a actual a house that handles the restoration. And then MK2 later gave them corrected masters for the new ones, but Criterion had nothing to do with the actual restoration of those releases, aside from possibly financial involvement. So a lot of the times, these restoration houses, like I was involved in a release of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly 4 years ago for Kino. And essentially, Rich Ravada gave Kino this incredibly yellow master. And so the colorist at Kino had to go, well, are we running with it? Or are we going to like correct the already corrected one, which is never going to look perfect, but at least look better. And to their credit, they did that, but they had no budget for that. So they had, I think, $2,000 to update the color for that movie, which tells you kind of how much these companies are at the mercy of their suppliers. But if anyone wants to get the proper versions of these movies, the Criterion release of 3 colors on 4K Blu-ray is amazing. And also Carlotta Films, a European company, did Double Life and 3 colors as well, and that's also a really good release. Avoid Potemkin, it was terrible. Any other questions? Yeah.
As you add filters, the amount of light that goes through the lens, I guess, less and less.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you select the ISO, or the sensitivity of the film? Is there a rule for that? I mean, you compensate with the stops, but at a certain point, if you add 6 filters, it doesn't matter how much you open.
Icek was actually asked that, and his response was, we didn't, we just let the film be dark. Which, in the case of short film about killing, you might notice that most of the shots are heavily underexposed and really grainy. And that was part of their, again, how disgusting is that, right? It's, it's deliberately sabotaging the look of the film to achieve a tonal end.
How does that affect the depth of field?
Unless you stop down or up the lens, I mean, if I was doing it, I would do it all digitally. But if I was on set doing it and wanted to maintain an exposure, I would probably pre-measure the filters. I would probably do a test where I shone light through them to see what the transmission factor was, and then I would factor that in. But generally, you'd get, I guess, a shallower depth of field because you'd have to open up your f-stop or just put in less neutral density filters if you didn't want to change your f-stop. So there's a few ways around it, I bet.
Do you think that's the reason they were using the magnifier glasses and things like that to play with the depth of field? Because it was too shallow, maybe because they had to open the diaphragm.
I think they were using those more for just their specific effects, right? Like you'll see in Veronique in a few minutes, one of the opening shots is through a marble, and that is a very specific effect that flips the image and distorts it horrendously. So generally when they're using one of those, it looks completely wild and you'll know they're using them. So I think if they wanted to, for example, achieve a deeper focus with the filters, probably they would just, my guess is they would step print, or not step print, they would push the film stock. For example, they're shooting at maybe ISO 400, maybe they'll push it to 1600 and just live with the noise. Yeah, so there's a few ways around that. Yeah, question?
So are you saying that glass filters are only used for film, they're not necessary, or they don't really apply to digital cinematography?
It's more of a post-production. There's still a place for glass filters. Like if you're shooting a sky and it's 10 stops overexposed and it's digitally clipping, yeah, it may be a filter. But nowadays, the actual usage of filters has fallen off sharply, not because of shooting on film, but because of post-production, of digitization. For example, Roger Deakins was maybe the first to do this as far as major cinematographers go. He wouldn't even correct his tungsten film stock, meant for like warm lights like this, for daylight. So all of his dailies came out bright blue. Instead of putting that filter in, he would just correct in post, getting the exact same effect. So that was kind of the start of offloading of that technical part of the workflow, even if he always intended to do it.
Did anyone ever use these glass filters for 16mm?
Oh, I bet you could. Actually, I think I'm pretty sure Short Film About Killing is 16mm. I think Decalogue was all 16. I might be mistaken. I'll have to check my sources there. We had some movement there. Did I see any hands there? Okay, we definitely had a hand there.
I was just going to say something about that question, is that a lot of cinematographers, it's a bit of a point of pride to do as much as possible in camera, because if you wait until months later, you might not be around to oversee the final color timing, and a lot of your ideas are be overruled by someone else.
I'll say I have kind of two answers to that. One is that, yeah, one of the realities of the industry, as you're no doubt very aware, is the you don't have control over the final image, right? And I've seen countless cinematographers, people have disowned their films because of that sometimes, right? My personal practice is I'm a control freak who colors everything I shoot. So that's, but I think on films where the cinematographer is given the leeway to kind of supervise the process, to me one of the beautiful things is that just because the tools are at the end of the pipeline doesn't mean the decision has to be. For example, this is not a film where I did this, but on some films where I have done this, I'm going to pull this there and open this. On some films where I have done this, like this is not one, but for example, say I was shooting this film for this look, right? On the day, I would make the decision to add a lot of negative space to frame left to account for that filter, right? And so if I went, okay, I want to shoot this using the ItCheck toolkit, which I love doing, I would on the day or in pre-production preferably make those decisions, get myself the data I need to finish the execution of those decisions in post-production, if that makes sense. So for me, it's not that I rarely decide anything in post personally, but I do I do plan to execute decisions in post that I've already made before. It's like writing a script and then editing those lines together in post. Same thing to me, if that makes sense. But I'm also very lucky because I work on nothing but super low budget projects where I'm allowed to do that. So that's a low budget point of pride. I think we have time for one more. I saw you up there. Raise your hand.
Oh, yeah, it's not a question, just, I've been watching films for years, but lately, because of this course, I've really been sort of watching, I've always liked when they mix color temperatures in films and are very brave with color and contrast and so forth, but I think you've kind of really outlined some of the ways it's done in a way I hadn't seen before, and the whole idea between tinting and toning and all these, I think it was a really great evolution of how color was introduced. I just want to say thanks, because it really was very instructional, and backed it up with great clips. That was just great.
Well, thank you so much. It means a lot to hear that. I think what we'll do is we'll take our 10 minutes, and that means that using film set time, we'll be back here at exactly 1:57 to watch the Double Life of Veronique. Hooray! Thanks so much, everyone. See you all after the movie.